Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this hustings meeting of the GLA candidates for South West London. My name is Una O'Brien. I'm a retired civil servant and I lived in Mortlake and East Sheen for the last 15 years. And I want to thank everybody for joining. We've already got over 75 people on the call. And especially thank you to our local GLA candidates, Candice Atterton, Andrée Frieze, Gareth Roberts and Nicholas Rogers, who've made the time to be with us this evening for what I understand is their last, one of their last hustings meetings of this campaign. So in a few moments, I'm going to ask the candidates each to introduce themselves, and we're actually going to do reverse alphabetical order this evening, starting with Nick, to make their initial opening comments, and they've each got 3 minutes to do that. And I'd like to remind everyone that this event is being recorded and will be put up on the Mortlake Brewery Community Group's website later on. And so our meeting's been convened by the Mortlake Brewery Community Group, the Mortlake and East Sheen Society, and the Mortlake Community Association. All three organisations have worked closely over the last 10 years on behalf of the community to press for a sustainable development on the former Stag Brewery site. And I know many of you on the call will know this has never been a case of NIMBYism. The need for residential development is widely accepted. Rather, it's always been a case of seeking a development that's proportionate and fits the constrained realities of this riverside site. The situation now is the Mayor for London has taken over as the planning authority, and whomever is elected mayor in a few weeks' time will have to determine the planning application after a public hearing, which will be at some point in the near future. One of our panellists this evening will shortly be elected as our representative to the Greater London Assembly for this area. And that individual will have an important role in challenging and scrutinising the mayor and bringing to bear a local understanding of what the issues are for South West London in City Hall. So in terms of how we're going to run this evening, my role will be to chair, and I'm going to put the questions based on the many questions which have been lodged in advance. We're constrained by having to work virtually and by a short amount of time we've got this evening. And so working with people from MES and the MCA, we have combined and grouped the questions under key topics of concern, and we'll aim to get through as many as possible in the time. And I'll give a very short lead in to each topic, and then when we get to the questions, I will read out a specific selected question, so it can be very clear for the panellists the things that we would like them to address. And so let's move on then to introductions and opening comments. And I would therefore very much like to invite Nick Rogers, who is the Conservative candidate. Welcome, Nick. It's very nice to see you, and thanks again for being here, to give us your initial introduction and your 3 minutes on your views on the Stag Brewery development. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you very much, Una, and thank you to the Mortlake Brewery Community Group for putting together this hustings. It is one of the major issues in South West London, so I'm delighted to have this opportunity to discuss it tonight. So I'm Nick Rogers. I'm the Conservative candidate for the London Assembly's South West seat. For those of you who don't know my background, I'm a railway worker. I've worked in railway operations for 10 years. I'm also a former Metropolitan Police Special Constable and a community campaigner, and I live just down the road in Surbiton. Normally, I would try and be positive and upbeat about approaching any topic that comes up at hustings, but unfortunately, apart from the community's response to this, there's not an awful lot to be positive about the development and its history. And now I'm not a councillor, I'm not a planning expert, but I don't think you need to be either one of those things to see how crashingly inappropriate the current proposals are. So residents kept me informed throughout, since I was selected back in March 2019, residents kept me informed of what was going on. And when the mayor called in the application and the revised proposals came out, I was absolutely aghast at the 40% increase and the change to the proposals. The reality is that the site in Mortlake, as we all know, is inescapably and significantly constrained, whether you're looking at the river, the railway and the level crossing, which of course I know a bit about, the major roads. I don't think it was suitable for the 813 units, let alone 1,250. It's simply not sustainable. So knowing this, seeing this happen, I wanted to try and amplify the community's voice and do whatever I could as a candidate to help fight this. I put together a petition to the mayor, and some of you may remember receiving this leaflet as part of that campaign. As we speak, that's been signed by over 1,100 people. That was presented to the mayor. I got Sean Bailey came down to speak with residents, to voice his opposition as well. And I say in November, Tony Arbour presented that petition to the mayor, who responded really saying nothing very much. So if elected, this issue it's a top priority for me. It's right up there with Hammersmith Bridge. One of my first priorities, if elected, will be to meet with the planning officers at the earliest opportunity. Also want to get residents in the room as well with planning officers too, so they can restate their objections to this scheme. I will restate my objections as an assembly member. If the worst case comes and it's approved by the mayor, I'll write to the Secretary of State asking him to call in the application. I think the bottom line to this, and this is why, again, I say I can't be especially positive and upbeat, that this development as it currently stands is an existential threat to Mortlake. And as Una says, no one is saying no to this development. I've not spoken to a single, to development in principle, I've not spoken to a single person who says, oh no, we can't have it, we want to keep it as it is, or whatever it might be. People welcome appropriate development. There are strong and robust community alternatives to this. And I think that the community should have been heard properly from the outset. And it's frankly a tragedy that this didn't happen. So ultimately, I agree.
Your time, Eddie.
I agree with the group that the scheme should be scaled back and the hearing postponed until it has happened.
Okay, thank you. Nick, thank you very much indeed. Right, so going in reverse order, Gareth, good evening and welcome. Nice to see you. And would like to ask you now to introduce yourself and to set out your approach to the development. I did give Nick slightly over 3 minutes, so I will be fair. So if you please carry on.
Thank you, and thank you to the Mortlake Brewery Community Group for organising this evening. This is a very real issue, a very real threat to Mortlake, as we all know it. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gareth Roberts. I'm the leader of the council here in Richmond. And in Una's opening remarks, she mentioned that this is our local knowledge and experience in order to get this over the line. And that is what I'm here offering to you as the candidate who has got local knowledge as a Richmond resident and also as leader of the council. You could send somebody to City Hall who has no political experience. However, you need somebody who's going to be able to challenge this on day one with Sadiq Khan. Indeed, you need somebody who has been challenging this already. And whilst I understand that petitions have been raised and that meetings will be sought with the GLA and their planners, both Sarah Olney and I have already been having those meetings and will continue so to do, whether I'm elected or not. But it would give me a greater voice in City Hall on your behalf if I could be your South West London Assembly member. Now, in terms of the various parties, you've been let down by the Conservatives on this. I understand that Nick said that Tony Arbour has presented a petition, but I think that very little has been heard from Tony Arbour on this matter, on Hammersmith Bridge, or on the home base sites, just a little up the road in Manor Circus. And again, the Conservatives have let you down on that issue as well, when they could have called in that decision where Sadiq Khan overturned the planning decision of the local council. and decided to impose the development anyway. Robert Jenrick, the Secretary of State, could have called that in, and he did not, which doesn't give me a great deal of hope that he will be minded to call this application in either, should Sadiq Khan get his way. And of course, you've been let down by Labour. Sadiq Khan, the Labour mayor, has forced this additional density and these additional heights onto the local neighbourhood. You will recall that the Liberal Democrat-led council came to an arrangement with the developers, which delivered a proportionate and respectful development, which was mindful of the local heritage and the impact on the local area. Of course, if we could have got it lower, then we still would have done. However, we felt, and we had some support in the local community, that roughly 800 houses or units, as we say in planning, was the way forward. Unfortunately, Sadiq Khan wishes to impose an additional, however many, 450 units on you roughly, and another 3 stories. And that is not in keeping with the local area and will have a major impact on local services. What we did do as a council was listen to residents regarding their concerns about the Chalkers Corner development, and that was refused by the planning committee because we recognised the detrimental impact that that would have predominantly on social housing in the area. So what you have to make a choice on May the 6th is whether you want somebody who's experienced, knowledgeable about the local area, who is already working on your behalf for this development, or if you want to take a punt on Nick, who, nice guy, I've met him through these discussions, but is politically inexperienced, and also won't be able to get through to the mayor on day one, like I will, or the Labour candidate who is going to be in the pocket of the mayor and won't stand up for your interests, because Labour are forcing this development onto this community. Okay. I'm offering experience, I'm offering leadership, and I'm the best person to get your vote, in my humble opinion.
Thank you very much indeed, Gareth. That's very, very clear. Now, I think it's the turn of Andrée Frieze. Good evening, Andrée, and lovely to see you. And I'd like to hand over to you. I'll give you a little over 3 minutes just to be completely fair. So the floor is yours.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to attend, and thank you to the Mortlake Brewery Community Group for likewise putting this hustings on. Just to explain a little bit about myself, my name is Andrée Frieze. I'm the Green Party candidate for the South West London Assembly. I'm also a councillor in Richmond. I was elected in 2018, and I'm the Deputy Green Group Leader in Richmond Council. I'm one of 3 Green Party councillors, and although we're small in number, we do try and punch above our weight, and we like to work collaboratively and cross-party. And as a result of that, we have helped push Richmond to become an accredited living wage payer. So that's not just for staff, but for contractors as well. We've called on the government to carry out basic income trial, and the council has also declared a climate emergency. We can't do those things on our own, and but as our assembly members, existing assembly members in the London Assembly already do, Sian Berry and Caroline Russell, we like to work cross-party. So I know that Sian and Caroline have already been lobbying the mayor to try and to talk to him about the Mortlake Brewery development. It is a difficult one as assembly members to have a lot of power, because the reality is that we hold the mayor to account. We can't stop him from doing things. We're not part, as assembly members, we are not part of the decision-making process over whether the brewery development as proposed will go ahead or not. What we can do is point out the flaws in the development, and that is what we have done. I have been speaking to some of the members of the community group of late, and one of the biggest issues that really concerns me is the lack of affordable housing. I know that what they've done is to increase it from the number of units by 400, and by so doing, bring in 30% of affordable housing. Now, the definitions they've used are what Sian Berry, our mayoral candidate, calls dodgy. The concept of London living rent and affordable are just ridiculous. They do not support the needs of the community. They will not provide the housing that London needs, and any development that goes ahead on the Mortlake Brewery side must include social housing, and ideally should actually reach the 50% of proper affordable housing that this borough needs, that the London plan calls for, and it should meet what the borough's needs are in terms of affordable rents, as opposed to shared ownership, which is again is another scandal of housing that we should not be having in any development in Richmond, let alone across the country, across London. Gareth has talked very finely about why he's the right person for this. I think he managed to ignore me in his roundup of why he would be better than the other candidates. As somebody who's actually worked at City Hall for the last 18 months, I know exactly how City Hall works. I know exactly how the Assembly works and what levers of power they have to use. So if you were to elect me as your London Assembly member, I can assure you that I would hit the ground running in that rather hackneyed phrase, and I would know exactly how to contact the various people. The one in particular who I would go straight to would be the Deputy Mayor, Tom Copley, who is responsible for housing and regeneration. In fact, I'm already waiting to hear from him because I have written to him on the community group's behalf asking for a meeting, because it's a disgrace that the community group have not been involved at any stage of the planning. And that is one thing that I would try and effect immediately, would be meetings between the mayor, between the Deputy Mayor in particular, and the community group. But I'm looking forward to the questions tonight, so I will leave it there, and look forward to putting more views and policies over shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrée. And then finally to Candice, who is the Labour candidate. And welcome, Candice. Thank you too for making the time. And make sure you get a little over 3 minutes as well. And we're very interested now to hear your introduction and your initial views on the Mortlake Brewery development site.
Hi, welcome everyone. It's great to be here. I thought I would just explain a few reasons why I feel that I could be your representative at the Southwest, and why I would love you to put your trust in me and vote for me to be not the candidate, the member at City Hall. I really feel that what I bring to this is my experience, and it's my personal, my professional, and my political experience. Why I feel I can speak for you as residents across the Southwest. My personal experience related to the topic tonight is that I did grow up in a household that would have been considered under the poverty line with a single parent mother, and that brought challenges in my childhood. But one thing we did have was that my parents were able to buy a home before they divorced. And so it meant that any struggles that we did have, we were always sort of very safeguarded by having security in housing. And that's huge. And that's something that I see lots of families just do not have. So onto my professional experience, my background is in youth justice and children and young people's public health. And I see how housing interplays and intersects with health and well-being and the children and young people I work with. And politically, the casework that I see is often very inextricably, if that's the right word, linked to housing. So I'll have someone who comes to me to talk about needs of an SEN child, and then it turns out actually their issues are much more about how do they manage their child's needs when they're in an overcrowded situation, or when they're in a flat block where the neighbours don't understand why their child is making noise, or when the shared garden isn't suitable and they can escape and run across the road, etc. So I really feel like it's my professional, my personal and my political experience, which is why I think I could be the voice for people across the Southwest. Speaking specifically on this issue, I'm very aware of the needs. I've spoken to members from the group, Mortlake Brewery Community Group, so I really think I understand why there is huge concern, and I appreciate that this it's too dense, that there's the Mortlake is going to be potentially almost doubled in population with this build. It encroaches on our green space, and I really am concerned about that. I also really recognise that from my experience at Hounslow Council is we don't pass things at a planning application level that are likely to then get called in. So I think it's a real failure of Richmond Council to allow this development to go through on 17% affordable housing. We push at Hounslow really hard to make sure that the demand for housing really meets the demand in the community, and affordable housing, of course, that's part of the London plan. So of course this development was going to get called in. We worked really hard to make sure our applications meet as closely as possible, but things are out of our control. What needs to happen is that government need to change planning law, but they don't change planning law. So all the balls are in the court of the developers, who are often their friends, which is something, all the sleaze and Tory sleaze that's coming out at the moment. I even understand that people have been backing, some of the campaigns for Tory candidates. They are developers. That's how they've made their money. So, I really think we need to change planning law. I'm really glad that Sadiq wants more devolved power, so you can have rent caps and really look at the housing crisis and affordability in the bigger picture. And I think we have to push as hard as we can for affordable, but I recognise that we really need to push, and I would be that person who would have meetings straight away with Sadiq Khan and Jules Pike if elected, and you know, the jury's still out. Sadiq has not made up his mind on this. There is going to be a public hearing, and I hope he's going to really listen to all your concerns. Well,
I'm sure that last sentence you will find unanimous agreement with that, Candice. So thank you, and thank you to all the other candidates, and hopefully Beverly will be reconnecting us all in a moment, fingers crossed. Or if candidates are there, they can turn their cameras back on. Yes, it's happening, it's happening. There we go, fantastic. It works. I will say I have never chaired a hustings like this before, so we're all learning together, so bear with me. Anyway, right, so what the plan is, as I mentioned earlier, we've got questions on under very predictable topics. I'll just give a very brief intro and then we'll go into the questions. And I think on this first question, perhaps we'll just do the reverse order. So I might come to you first, Candice, but if we stick in alphabetical order, I think that seems to work well. So the first topic is predictably density and design. And there are very significant and a large number of concerns that the development is too dense and too tall. Some of you have referenced that the number of units has gone from just over 800 in the plan that went before Richmond to one at before the mayor, which is now 1,250 units. And there's been significant increases in height, which is deeply concerning. And we now note that 44% of the entire floor space is above 7 stories, which of course raises big questions about the sort of money the developer is going to get for those heights. Very concerning. Anyway, I wanted to just refer to the fact that 2 of our questioners have asked you to bear in mind the new London plan and the post-pandemic patterns of living and working, both of which suggest that this whole development needs a fresh look. And so here is the question. If you were elected, what part would you play in ensuring that the mayor takes account of the existing realities in Mortlake and this new changing context of the London plan and post-pandemic London, so that the Stag redevelopment is sustainable and sensitive to the nature of the site? Candice, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. It's really important that we do recognise that we are in a, you know, a really changed picture. The world has changed completely, and what we have learned from the pandemic is how important well-being is in all our decision making, and it's really important that we put residents' well-being and health, you know, right at the top. I mean, I do feel that well-being comes from adequate and affordable housing. So I do think it's really important that we do have developments and we do try as best as possible to see what our demand is and make sure that we're delivering. When I was on the doorstep recently, you know, I spoke to a lot of families, or, you know, you can see who lives in the families, and there was lots of adult children still living in homes, you know, really lovely homes, but, you know, they're not able to afford to buy, you know, homes of their own. So I really recognise that there is a need for affordable homes, and you know, as much as everyone would love to get certain, you know, would like certain kind of housing, a low level, it's not a reality unless we can change planning law. So I'm not on planning at the council, but my understanding is that the reason why density and height comes into place because developers can say, oh, well, we need this many units to make it viable. And viability in simplest terms, which is the only way I can really understand it when it comes to housing, is basically they are allowed to make a certain amount of profit for, you know, the number of units that they provide. So because they've been challenged and been told there's not enough affordable, that's how the numbers suddenly go up significantly.
Yeah. And just on that, Candice, how would you think you could help in terms of getting the viability statements made public so that we could all judge whether it is in fact the case that the heights have to go up? Would you be able to help with that if you were elected? I will put that to all the candidates.
It's definitely something that I would lobby for. I think transparency is absolutely key, and also community engagement. The biggest part, and that's what's so frustrating about this, is that you've got some very experienced, very skilled people from the community have put these cases together. They've made really strong arguments, and they haven't felt that they've been heard. There hasn't been enough meetings, and it feels like it's the developers that are getting all the meetings. So, but yeah, I would be really pushing and questioning whether these kind of developments match the current need. And as you've mentioned and alluded to, people are living very differently. People are going to be spending more time in their homes. We recognise how important green spaces are now, and that people really need to have accessible green spaces. And also some of the sort of measures around like traffic flow, etc., were done in the pandemic. So I think there also needs to be a review of that, because I think one of the concerns from the group is that the traffic was a lot lower during the pandemic. So we need to have a review of what traffic would be like if we had this increase in the density.
Good, because that is the next topic. So we'll pick up on that then.
And one more thing on the height is that my understanding is that often footprints of these sort of developments, you don't have to go as high. You can still achieve similar amounts of units by just being a lot more creative and innovative in layouts, etc. So I do think that there's a strong argument that you don't necessarily always have to just go up to get more units.
Okay, it's very interesting. Thank you. Andrée.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things about the New London Plan was that the Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick, said that height needs to be a much more localised decision, and yet that's been taken out of our hands and has been given to the mayor. And the fact that since the application was passed up for the stage 2 review, the developers have increased the size and the density without any communication with the local council at all on that one. And the council have the planning department have written back a very robust statement of why they don't agree with the new proposals. It is a tricky one, as I alluded to before, in terms of being an assembly member, but there are mechanisms that can be used. For example, the mayor gives grant to housing developers to build affordable homes in developments, and in those grants, when he gives those grants, he's then able to demand that there's 50% affordable housing, and that's when things get passed, is when he allows for that. So on the one hand, he could turn around, we could lobby him quite easily and turn around and say, this doesn't reach the 50% affordable housing, you've only got 30% in there, you need to get them to ask for grant if they haven't asked for it already. And in that grant, he could then put conditions on that about the height and the density. At the moment, the mayor is loath to put conditions onto the developers that develop developments in our area. But that is something that our mayoral candidate, Sian Berry, has started to ask him to do, that you start putting conditions onto, because he has a list of developers that they use, all the big ones that we know. And you could start putting conditions on and actually say, right, the time has come. You get a lot of money from the taxpayer to build homes that you then have these viability assessments that you say you can't build under a certain amount. So they're getting money hand over fist, both from taxpayers in terms of getting grant, and then they're making masses of money on their profit. So there are a lot of issues there.
And can you help, Andrée, if you were elected, in getting the viability statements all put into the public domain?
Again, it's one of those things that we have to lobby the government for, but I think it's certainly we could lobby the mayor and say this needs to happen. You could also, again, that could be one of the grant conditions, would be to say, if you're going to develop this land, we'd like to see the viability assessment put into public. They keep saying it's for commercial reasons, but we all know that it's so they can hoodwink us at the end of the day. Unfortunately, I have to say our planning system and our housing system is pretty much rotten from top to bottom. We have an issue where there's not enough council homes being built. Those that are negated because of estate demolition and right to buy sell-offs. Sian Berry's one of her recent calls on the mayor was to actually demand a suspension of right to buy. and he's refused because he actually says, no, my parents bought their home under right to buy, so therefore I think it's a great thing. That may be for the handful of those who can afford to do so, but at the end of the day, that's taxpayers' money was spent on building council homes that are then sold off at a discount. All too often they end up in the hands of large letting estate agents who then let them back to councils for social house rent.
Well, we're going to come back to housing, as you can imagine, we are. So thank you very much, Andrée. I'd like to turn to Gareth next, please, on that opening question about density and height.
Yes, thank you. And I should apologise to Andrée for not including her in the original list of people. But then again, she has said on social media on the 20th of February that for her to win is an outside chance. So that's why. It's a bit rough that Candice comes here this evening and starts blaming the planning system and the planning departments for height and density. There's a reason for the fact that we are being asked to take more height on this development and more density on this development, and that reason is Sadiq Khan and the Labour mayor that Candice is campaigning alongside on, and will be and hopes to sit in City Hall alongside. Sadiq Khan is bringing this additional development to this area. There was already a planning application which had got permission on the table, which was largely respectful of the local area and was acceptable in terms of density and height. However, we are now here again today because Sadiq Khan wants to ride roughshod over the opinions of not only the local planning authority, but also the local residents. In terms of whether we can get the viability report released into the public domain, that's always a long shot because, as Andrée has already referred to, this is a matter of commercial sensitivity, and unless we can force them to reveal it, it is very difficult. I remember listening to a program on Radio 4 about 8 years ago now, and the idea was mooted and floated rather that rather than having a local authority planning department, that if a local authority really wanted to maximise its affordable housing, that they should get rid of the planning department and just hire an army of viability consultants, because they're the ones who would be able to winkle out where all the bodies are being buried by the developers. In terms of what we can do, lobby. That's the thing. We need to keep being the voice of the local people, to keep coming back to Sadiq Khan and saying, listen, you need to rethink this. You need to bring this back to the table. You need to listen to local people. Can't guarantee that that will happen. Anybody that's going to tell you tonight that they will be able to change the mayor's mind is lying to you. But what we can do is be your tribune at City Hall. Be the person that is going to be your voice and lobby as hard as we possibly can in order to make that happen. And as I say, in order for that to happen, you need somebody that's got experience in politics. And that's that.
Thank you very much, Gareth. And then finally, on this question of density, height, and indeed the viability, are the developers making too much profit on this? Nick, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, in terms of the density, the proposals currently are more akin to central London than they are to what you would expect in suburban Richmond. They're simply not appropriate to the local area. And the question asks us about the new situation of the pandemic, and everything we've seen over the last years is that that dense tower blocks, high-rise housing is precisely the opposite of what people want. And there have been studies, there's a good one, interesting one from Create Streets, looking at the different experience between people who live in terrace housing and people who live in high-rise blocks. And half the people who lived in high-rise blocks reported throughout lockdown zero interaction with their neighbours, none whatsoever. And that's an incredibly unhealthy way to be designing cities and designing developments. And it's also the question asked about the existing context of Mortlake. That kind of housing, that kind of architecture and design is completely out of context with the surrounding area of Mortlake as well. And it just seems that this development takes no account of the local context whatsoever. It's kind of like landed like a spaceship from some other planet, just plonked down in the middle of this perfectly pleasant low-rise suburban area as something completely alien to what local residents would expect. And you'd have hoped that post-pandemic, we would have learned lessons. We would have seen what works, what didn't work, understood people's experiences over this last year, and used that to inform a better design, and to sit with the locals, to sit with the community, to start again and to scale back. But at present, that hasn't happened. Now, in terms of transparency, I agree. We can lobby. We have to lobby. We have to lobby for transparency on viability reports. Other things as well. There needs to be parity about access to mayoral advisors, and I think it's a disgrace that the community group had to lodge freedom of information requests to get information about how many times the developers had met with the mayor's planning team. That should be the kind of information that should be transparent and out there. There are good reasons why officers shouldn't need to meet with developers, but if there are good reasons, then no one's got anything to worry about, and there should be parity as well. Local groups should not have to fight to get these kinds of meetings. So if I'm elected, I will of course lobby for transparency. I'll also fight to make sure that that residents are included in meetings with the key people.
Right. Well, that's very, very helpful. Well, thank you all on that question. And I must say, you know, the level of engagement with the detail of what's happening in Mortlake, and it's very impressive to hear that you've all, you know, really starting to really engage with the jeopardy that the people who live here feel that we are in. Let me move on then to another aspect of that problem, which is traffic. I mean, we've had more questions on this than anything else. It's a multifaceted issue, so I'm not going to have a question on every detail, you'll be pleased to hear. But just to give you a flavour, the questions range from: do people understand there is only one road from which you can get access to this site, the Lower Richmond Road? That's the first one. The congestion in the wider area, which pre-existed before the closure of Hammersmith Bridge and has since intensified. The impact of the level crossings, particularly at Mortlake, which cause stationary idling traffic for 48 minutes in every hour. And then concerns about the traffic implications of schemes in Brentford and Isleworth, not to mention the ones within the Borough of Richmond itself, and all of them feeding onto the South Circular Road, particularly in Kew. So this is a mountain, this problem, but combining all of this, the specific questions that we boiled it down to are as follows, relatively short. How could the already busy local roads possibly cope with the traffic generated by the scheme? And what do you think should be done? And how will you seek to influence the mayor to reduce the traffic generated by this development? So I think we'll go, if everyone's okay, with the reverse order this time. So Nick, are you ready to jump in on that question? Thank you.
Yes, sure. So how would the roads cope with the traffic generated by this scheme? Well, they wouldn't, is the very short answer. Anyone who's been to that area knows that at the moment there's simply not enough space on the roads as it is, and this development is crashingly inappropriately sized for an area chock full of traffic, and it makes it worse with almost no mitigation. And other things as well, you know, things like Uber, Deliveroo, Amazon, the modern way of living, which is not accounted for in traffic models, which is going to be exacerbated by an increase in people working from home. It doesn't take regard of that. You know, we live in times where even if you don't have a vehicle, you still create vehicular movements through the things I've just spoken about. Hammersmith Bridge as well. We've basically got a situation where this is one of the only routes out of Barnes, and it's taking massive amounts of additional traffic. This development will only exacerbate it. The level crossing, down for up to 48 minutes in peak time, and even if we think there may be a temporary sort of drop in the numbers of people commuting, Andy Bifford, the Commissioner of TfL, has said that on his network, I think he's talking about 12 to 18 months, he says, before returns to sort of normal pre-pandemic passenger levels. Well,
given your experience in TfL and Network Rail, I mean, if you were elected, what could you do to ameliorate this threat?
The level, well, so I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for my employer, Network Rail, but the level crossing is at the moment it's an immovable obstacle. There are reasons why those barriers have to be down for a set amount of time. They're very, very good safety reasons why that happens. And the only thing that one could do would be to tunnel and to bury the railway line. And I don't think that that's going to happen anytime soon. I guess another option would be a flyover, but that would be a blight on the community, and no one would want to see that. I think one thing that we do need, people have spoken about the different developments in South West London, whether it's home base. People have spoken about the developments over the river in Brentford. We do need some kind of regional assessment of traffic and transport and the impact, the cumulative impact that all this stuff is having on the area. Because at the moment, and with this development, it's going to become impossible for people to move around. And even buses, I'm a massive fan of buses because they're the most, they're the cheapest, the easiest, the most flexible way of increasing public transport. But you put buses into the current traffic situation and the increased traffic that this development will cause, and you'll have buses sitting in traffic jams. People won't take the bus. The income that bus generates will go down and buses will be cut. And in any case, we're looking at a context where the current mayor is reducing outer London buses by 7%. I do think that a big focus on active travel would be good. And there's all kinds of things one can do with a development like this. You can build it in from the ground up, whether it's more bike hangers or that sort of thing. But that again won't be a panacea. The only thing is to reduce the scale of the development. I'm sorry, I've probably taken up too much time.
Yes, so but I think you have floated one idea there, which I think is very relevant to this campaign, given that you know whoever's elected covers 3 constituencies, is a more strategic look at the traffic issue, not just borough by borough, but in South West London. So, you know, if the others want to pick up on that, that would be fantastic. So Gareth, over to you. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. Well, the answer, of course, is that we need to start driving less. I mean, this is not an issue which is, you know, entire only into Mortlake. This is something which is across the entire borough. If there was the one thing which is possibly the most depressing about representing this fine area of any part of the borough is that everything that you try to do, every piece of development you want to achieve, always boils down to either how am I going to drive my car or how am I going to park my car. And we're in it, to be honest, it sounds a bit extreme, but I view this as almost addictive behavior, is that people have now become addicted to how they can move about in their cars. And we need to start having really honest discussions with all of us, myself included, about whether we need to have a private car living in South West London, and whether we need to, and if you do have one, how often you take it out. And it's one of the policies which is being floated by the Lib Dems at this election, is the idea, rather than having this clunking fist of the expanded ULEZ, is to adopt a smart road pricing strategy so that it makes people think about how they use their cars. So rather than I live in Hampton, and I was once knocking on doors, and I heard somebody, shout up the stairs to their wife who was just leaving the house, and he said, "Just pop into Waitrose, darling." And then she said something, and said, "No, I'm going to take the car." He lived 3 minutes walk from Hampton. If you have a system where you can start, disincentivizing people to make those short trips, then you can start addressing the impact of cars on our roads.
So how would you? But having said that, Gareth, you did. Your planning committee did approve a development in Mortlake with a very large number of underground car parking spaces. So I'm just trying to join the dots between those two things.
It was unfortunately it was planning compliant. We were dealing at the time with the inherited local ban, which allowed that number of things. If we had refused it on the parking grounds, then they would have taken it off to they would have appealed, taken it off to Bristol, and once again the decision would have been taken entirely out of the local authorities, out of local people's hands. But I do know that the local planning team look very, very hard at trying to get as few spaces as they possibly can on sites to make it compliant within. So they don't go for loads and loads of cars, but they do enough to make sure. Because otherwise, what you will find is that you would have a 24-hour CPZ around the area. If you were to make it car-free, you would have to make it, CPZ all the way around, 24 hours, so that existing residents didn't suddenly find their local streets clogged up with cars.
I think a lot of local residents would be delighted to have that, even now, but that's another debate for another day. So it's very helpful to have that insight, Gareth, around a broader policy issue from the Lib Dems on car use. Shall we move on then? Because I want to fit in more questions.
Of course.
Thank you, Gareth. So Andrée, where are you on this question of transport?
Thank you. It's quite interesting to hear Gareth talk and hearing him trying to join up the dots regarding reducing car ownership and car usage in this borough, when the Liberal Democrat Council have consistently refused to take action to reduce car usage in this borough. For example, in their last budget, they continue to have free and subsidised car parking in the borough. So they are continuing to encourage people to take short journeys and to drive into Richmond Centre and to drive into local places and to use their cars. They refuse to put into CPZs. They refuse to increase CPZs. So I find find what he's just said slightly astounding.
And it's not true, Andrée. You know that's not true.
We can go through the budget if you want to, Gareth, because there is nothing in there about removing the free car parking, which the Greens have consistently called for as a way to reduce car usage in the borough, which you know
and
from your own
you're
research.
also keen to have the driving through Richmond Park still, aren't you? So
okay.
Oh, yeah.
Heal thyself there, Andrée.
Yeah.
No, I have not.
You're both colleagues on Richmond Council, so I'm sure you'll have plenty of opportunities to fight this one out. But Andrée, specifically on the traffic around Mortlake.
Specifically on the traffic
from this
around
development.
Mortlake. Okay, so one of the reports that was produced in 2018 about the traffic showed there'd be a 12% uplift in traffic purely because of the development, and that some of the mitigation measures they put in to reduce that were the ones that got rejected by the council back in 2019 when the 3 applications went through. The point is that there was a really telling line in that report, which was they didn't want to put in more mitigation measures because that would increase traffic across the area, because if they reduce traffic in one space, cars come from another and fill it. We know that if you keep putting in roads, you keep getting more cars. So we have to desperately reduce the amount of car space we give on our roads to cars. And Nick made a good point about having a sort of a regional wide look at where what's happening in our borough and in southwest London. And I absolutely agree with that. We should be looking as a council. There's a lack of joined up thinking in terms of putting in cycle lanes, improving our walking infrastructure, all of those kind of things. And we desperately need to deal with air pollution. We have a real problem with air pollution in London. 10,000 early deaths associated with air pollution in London. And just last year, a coroner ruled on the case of Ella Kissy Deborah, very sad case of a 9-year-old girl who died from an asthma attack back in 2013. And she's the first person to have air pollution listed as a cause of death. She lived on the South Circular in South London, and that is a real problem. We need to be tackling air pollution, traffic congestion in our borough much more quickly, and we need to think about how we want our roads and street space to look like in 2030. Do we want it crammed with cars? No, we don't. We want to have public transport. We want to have active travel. We need to be focusing on car clubs and those kind of things.
So what should happen at the Mortlake development to stop this problem from getting dramatically worse?
Mortlake development should have the bare minimum of cars that need to be allowed. I mean, I'd actually offhand, I can't tell you what the London plans agreements are, but I think we should be lobbying for as little as possible. We need to be having space for cargo bikes, electric bikes. We need to be looking at last mile deliveries done by both of those in the borough, rather than having our streets clogged up with a Podo or whatever whatever the latest delivery system is.
Thanks.
So looking at infinite neighbourhoods, there are lots of different ways of looking at this and creating proper walking space. I mean, some of Mortlake Brewery Community Group's ideas about public realm and green corridors and walking and cycling are ones that we put forward in our response to the Royal Parks movement strategy, in which we called for reducing car ownership in the borough and car usage. And we are absolutely in agreement with Royal Parks' desire in the long term to cut Richmond Park to through traffic.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrée. That's very clear. And thank you also for mentioning the very upsetting death of Ella Kissy Deborah, which has certainly been a case that's resonated very much in the community around here. And we have actually made contact with and had conversations with her mother, who's an absolute exemplar of someone who is campaigning in the public interest. So Candice, what would you do if you were elected to influence the mayor to take account of the dreadful traffic situation in this area?
Thank you. So yeah, the question is about how will the roads cope, and I agree with Nick actually that the roads, will not cope. There's too many pinch points in this design and development. There's, there's an expectation that a mini roundabout might, improve to a roundabout might solve some of the problems. But the solution is got to be, better incentives to get people out of their cars. And, at Hounslow Council, we have a new Hounslow House, and one of the parts of the design was that it wasn't going to have parking for staff. And that was a really difficult conversation to have with our staff and with our councillors, because it meant like big behaviour change for people. But, for me, that is the sort of the drive that got me cycling to work when we could go to work before the pandemic. Because, I would usually just drive, and it was very easy because we had a car park. And as soon as I was sort of facing big parking charges or the stress of being late for a meeting because I couldn't find anywhere to park, that's what got me on my bike. But I would like to see a lot more carrot than stick. That did work for me, but there's other people where, a bike might not necessarily be the option. So I really want to see a much bigger picture. And again, you might say, of course, but I'm going to push this back to the government. We've just had this huge pandemic that's, we've lost all these lives, and the government has responded and it has found money to act in this crisis and to respond to this crisis. But, air quality, our toxic air, climate change is another crisis. The only way we can get people out of the car is having properly well-funded, public transport that's affordable, and a whole sea change. A lot of the reasons why people go in their cars to workplaces, and to schools is they're racing. They've got to get their kids to school, and then they've got to get to a workplace. The school might actually only be 5 minutes away, but because there's all this pressure, and it particularly falls on women getting children to school and then getting to workplaces, then they're having to drive. Or we've got situations where people don't get their first choice school.
So Candice, how can you help to influence all the things you're saying you support are going to have the reverse happening in Mortlake because of the development? So I just wondered, what specifically, if you were elected, you would do.
Well, I would like to see more incentives for people to give up their cars. Scrappage schemes don't go far enough. So I would be lobbying Sadiq Khan to really make sure that people switching to either reducing their car use or getting rid of their car, that it would be more incentivized. But I also think it really needs to be part of the mitigating factors. So I would want to be having these conversations with Sadiq and with Jules Pipe, and really making sure that they've got full understanding of the fact that this amount of extra people on this very dense development means that the roads will not cope. I already mentioned previously that there has to be a review, because if the kind of understanding of of flows of traffic was done during a pandemic when people weren't going out to work, then that will make a huge difference.
That was a very welcome point, because there have been a number of reviews done on the fringes of the pandemic, so they don't properly reflect the real situation. So thank you very much for making that point. I just noticed, I don't want to necessarily ask your comments on this, but of course the mayor himself is up for election, and we don't yet know who the mayor will be. So I just, it's just an observation. Now, mindful of time, I've got two more topics. So I'm going to ask you, I know it's hard, there's a lot to say, to try and keep your comments quite concise. And the next topic is education in schools. And you'll all know that, as well as housing, a secondary school is proposed for the site. And when the then Conservative Council in Richmond agreed in 2015 that it should be included in the planning brief, there was no public consultation on that matter. And it was anticipated that the school would be needed in the early 2020s, which was essentially the core of the case for it. So, but given the, so the central question, I'm just going to come straight to the point here, is that given the delay in building the school, noting that there are now falling roles in local primary schools, and noting that a school of this size is the major factor in the traffic impact of the development, hasn't the time come for an independent review of the case for the school? So Candice, you, and could go first if you don't mind, but please can we all try and keep comments to as much as possible short so we can get some more in.
I think the delay of the scheme is a really strong argument for a review on this. I know at Hounslow, it's something we really pride ourselves in, is that we have all these like metrics and formulas to try and understand what the demand is going to be for school places. And it's a lot more complicated than we think, because obviously some people go outside of borough to school, some people come into the borough. So I don't know how our teams do it, but we literally get it down to like, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 places out, we can guess the number of people that are going to be applying to our schools. So I'd be really curious to know, you know, what the demand was for a school. Was it definitely, you know, properly understood? Is the need really, really there? And I think, yeah, I would definitely welcome a review. And if the roles are falling, then that's a really, really good point. And on schools, just going back to my previous point as well, I think the other thing about wider infrastructure is also about, you know, traffic to secondary schools. It just shouldn't really exist. Like I grew up and we walked to school and we cycled to school when we were old enough to do that safely on our own. And so the other area that I'm really passionate about is reducing crime levels and also reducing like the fear of crime. And I think we've got to do a lot of work so that parents feel confident to allow their children to walk and ride their bikes and get buses to school, rather than, you know, knowing that if there is going to be a school, that there's going to be all this extra traffic because parents are dropping off 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds to secondary school. It just shouldn't be the case. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely think there's a strong argument for that, and I will definitely be voicing that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Candice. I'm sure lots of parents on this call breathe a huge sigh of relief at not having to do the school run. So thank you. So Andrée, what's your view on an independent review of the need for a secondary school?
Yes, it is an interesting one because we have been, as a councillor, I have been lobbied quite hard by the Mortlake Brewery Community Group on this issue. I have looked at the data. I have spoken to Matthew Paul, who's our officer who does all the data analysis and does all the matrices that Candice alluded to. And I have to say he's been doing it for quite some time, and he is very expert at it. And I do trust him because as a governor previously governor of a primary school, and someone who sits on the Children Education Services Committee, I do know that the council does do a good job in making sure that school places are where they're supplied where needed. Obviously that is slightly outside their hands these days because of the system that the Conservatives brought in of free schools and academies, so councils can no longer set up their own schools as and when required, which I find very difficult to comprehend. But I think given the situation of the pandemic, and I think how we have seen, not just anecdotally, but we have data and analysis of people choosing to move out of London, choosing to move boroughs in London to access more green spaces, that I think a lot of the things that we've taken for granted, such as housing numbers and demand for housing and school places, are things that we need to be looking at again. And I think calling for an independent review, I don't know how the mechanism for doing that, but I think it's something we should A, lobby the mayor on, and B, possibly even lobby the government on to see how we can access having a review of that one. To pick up on Candice's point about people cycling and young people cycling and walking to school, one of the pluses that has come out of the pandemic in the ward that I live in Ham, Peacham and Richmond Riverside, is the Grey Court, which is a very large secondary school which has a very wide catchment area, now has nearly half of its pupils cycling to school, and they've had to massively increase the number of bike racks they had, because they had a point where they literally had sort of scaffolding up and children were just dumping bikes and when they couldn't find their own bike at the end of the day, just picking up one and randomly walking off with it. So endless tales of parents going, but where's my little Stephanie's bike gone, or little so they got some funding from Richmond Parish Lands, and I think from to put in bike racks. So that is a positive story, and it's absolutely clear that schools and young people will cycle to school if they have to. I mean, let's be clear here that yes, there is an issue with school runs, and we know that it is from generally primary schools, but let's be clear, private schools, independent schools are a massive cause of school runs, because young people are shipped from all different parts of the boroughs. Yes, a lot of them put on buses, but there are still a lot of families who will get in their car and drive their child through whatever parts of London they want to get them to. So that is an issue that we need to grapple with as well.
Well, it's definitely one interconnected element of it, Andrée. Thank you very much for that answer. And I think it's over to you next, Gareth.
Thank you. I'm probably not going to win many friends here this evening, but there is a need for the school, irrespective of the alleged dropping of the role. André's mentioned on Matthew Paul, who's our officer who's responsible for forecasting, and he is very accurate within his forecasts. He's been praised by the DFE for being within a tiny margin of error year after year after year after year. And we've mentioned the pandemic already this evening, and we've mentioned the impact on people's lives. What we have to remember is that there are a lot of people who are significantly poorer as a result of the pandemic. People who've lost their jobs, they've been on furlough, their standard of living has gone down, and that includes a lot of people who in the past would have sent their children to private school who can no longer afford to do so. And we have a statutory responsibility as the local authority to provide school places for the children. Now, there are two sites which have been suggested could be due for expansion, Christ School and Richmond Park Academy. And Christ, when that was expanded into include its sixth form, was on the squeaky bum time in terms of the planning, on metropolitan open land for that. And any further expansion would be very, very difficult to get through planning at all. And there is similar difficulties with the expansion of Richmond Park Academy, not the metropolitan open land site, but there are issues regarding the health centre, not the health centre, the sports and fitness centre, in order to accommodate that. So what we have here is a needed school, a secondary school. Secondary schools do not generate an enormous amount of additional traffic during peak times, because I've got 3 teenage daughters, and the idea of them being dropped off outside the school by dad is absolute anathema.
I think it's the number of staff and the ancillary staff working at the school that is, if you look at the numbers that are in the planner's documents, that are a big factor in the traffic movements.
That would have to be discussions that the local authority has with the school about trying to encourage, incentivize. I mean, it's right bang on a major rail line, and several bus routes, and people should be able to try to use public transport whenever they can. Lots of schools don't have any parking on site at all for their staff, and so therefore there is.
Would you be prepared to support no parking on site? I think
I'd be prepared to have the discussions with them. Certainly be prepared to have the discussions with them, but you can't just sort of barge around and just fall.
Okay, well, that's
what I would say, I mean, I was interested, by the way, to see Candice, leap so delightedly to jump on the populist bus to say that she would deny choice to local parents about where they send their children to school, because that is effectively what she's saying would happen if she got the chance, that she would stop the school being built and deny choice for local parents about where they send them. And that's not on.
Seeing you were quite happy to talk over Andrée, I'll just come in at the point of intervention. I was not saying that. I was saying I would welcome a review. I'm glad to hear that your officers work as well as they do at Hounslow, and they believe there is that demand. But I think it is something that needs to be looked at if there has been a delay. I didn't say I'm against the school. I've listened to people in the community who have got big questions about whether there's a need for the school, but I would want to look at the evidence.
Okay, if that's the case, I accept that. But we must have to remember, though, big point, that if not the school, then what? The developers aren't going to suddenly hand over the vacated plot and say, let's have a lovely open space. If you don't have the school, you would have more housing. And that would be greater density, more cars, more movement, more people. And that's precisely what we don't want on this site, because what has been achieved within the planning process already, before the Labour mayor wades in with his additional height and additional density, is acceptable in planning terms. So if the school isn't there, it's be careful what you wish for. If the school's not there, what will be there in its place?
I think it's not my comment, Gareth, but what I see on one of the questions is somebody said the problem with this site is that everybody wants their pound of flesh, but there's more demand for pounds of flesh out of this site than there is space on it. And so, you know, it is the combination of the usages that people are wanting to put into it that's creating the problem. And nobody's prepared to give any ground at the moment. So I'm coming back round again, and there will be a final chance to comment as well. So not to cut you off at all, but time's short. So
no, stop.
Okay, Nick, over to you.
Thank you. I think we all have to recognise that that whatever the numbers say, this is not an ideal place for a secondary school. It's not ideal to put a secondary school next to a road which is constantly choked with pollution, constantly clogged with traffic. It's cramped and there's congestion. It's also deeply unfortunate that we'd lose the green space, the playing fields, which also are a valuable heritage asset for the community as well. Now, I have absolutely no doubt at all that the council officer is capable. I'm sure that that he's correct, but there is never there's never any harm in having things independently checked. So absolutely, I would agree with an independent review of these figures, especially in the context of a scaled back plan where the actual architecture and siting the school could potentially be different. And for that, we need to sit with the community and listen to what people want to say. But yeah, absolutely, I would support a review of the figures.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Nick. And it's a complicated issue, and I think you've aired all the different sort of considerations that have to be weighed. Now, we're in the final lap now. I do just want to pick up on that theme that Nick mentioned, which is playing fields and open space. Now, Richmond is widely known for green spaces and open spaces, but the actual reality, if you live in Mortlake, apart from the traffic nightmare that we experience on a daily basis, is that we've got two extremely small green spaces, Mortlake Green and the even smaller Jubilee Gardens. Mortlake Green is currently effectively, and no one is complaining about this, it's no fault of their own, but a playground and playing fields for Thompson House School, which has a primary school with virtually no outside space. So the pressure on the local small green space is intense. The pandemic has shown us that of the heightened importance of open space. The new London plan states that development proposals should not result in the loss of protected open space. There are, as you probably all know, very strong feelings about the private playing field within the Stag Brewery site. It's never been built on. In fact, it was the site of Thomas Cromwell's home. I hope he doesn't come back to haunt us by building on it. But the question that we have is, what would you do to support the community of Mortlake as we try to keep the open playing field from being either tarmacked or built on? So I think we go, which way? Nick, you're first this time. I think it just builds on what you've just said.
Yeah, thank you. We did touch on this. The playing fields are a heritage asset. They absolutely are. And the all-weather pitch that is proposed is not the same as grass. It's not a suitable replacement. So what would I do? I mentioned it just a couple of minutes ago. I would sit with the community. I would look to see how we could scale back the design and have a more appropriate design, especially for the school. And I think that this development, whether we're talking about open space, traffic, design, whatever, I just feel like it's a huge missed opportunity. It's got to be one of the largest developments in outer London, one of the largest sites in outer London. And this should be an exemplar for how you do design and how you build new communities in suburban London. And a lot of the stuff that Andrée was saying in a previous question about building in spaces for cargo bikes and that sort of thing, that's the kind of innovative thinking we should be designing in from the beginning with this. Unfortunately, it has just been bog standard, pile them high, sell them not very cheap.
Sell them expensive.
Yeah, so very expensive. and we don't care about what local people think. We'll just ignore them. So whether it's green space or other aspects of the development, local people aren't being listened to. I will lobby to make sure that they are.
Yeah, I'm not making in any sense a political point, Nick, but if some of your thoughts could be heard by the government in their reform of the planning laws, I know communities all over the country would be very supportive of that. So yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely, and also I'd say it's important that we have a range of voices, including Conservative voices, making those arguments as well.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Right, Gareth, it's over to you on help us save the playing field.
Well, yeah, what you need to keep doing is talking with the developers, because nothing is done until the planning fat lady sings. What we've been able to do, very similar case in point, with the Turing House all over in Whitton. One of the points which was made was loss of open green space for local residents. It was metropolitan open land. And what we were able to do was to sit down with the developers and say, look, how about making sure there is this about it?
Slightly losing you, Gareth.
Oh, sorry. It was I would try to project. It was how we managed to get some degree of still access to the open green space.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I agree that, but if it's AstroTurf or whether pitch, whatever it's called, we really should be trying for something ever so slightly greener. And we need to be keep going back to the developers and saying, look, is there something that you might be willing to change? Is there something you might be willing to support? Is there something we can do to make sure that people have got access to this particular site? So that they do not feel disadvantaged. We also need to make sure that throughout the whole of the development that there's going to be access to what we call rather pompously the riparian scene, the riverbank, for want of a better term, because that's one of the nicest things you can't get for a day out at the seaside. They go for a walk by the river. But what we need to do is keep talking, because developers, I usually find that they are quite willing to listen. They're quite willing to listen to reason. It may mean that the council gets a little bit of less cash in the Section 106 agreements and what have you, but if we can have some sort of leverage for community gain through the system, then we should keep talking. I mean, if developers are, not necessarily, the moustache twirling Victorian villain of myth. They do tend to want to create something which is going to be enjoyed by local residents, because otherwise they just find themselves getting a hell of a time from angry locals, as they have found already, and as indeed the mayor is finding.
Yeah, well, I'm sure, Gareth, for as long as you're on leader of Richmond Council, the people locally hearing that tonight will want to bank your offer to work with us, with the developer.
Absolutely.
And we will look to you for leadership on that. So thank you.
You can find me through all the usual offices, Una.
I'm sure we can. Right, over to you, Andrée.
Okay. I mean, in the past, I've voted against all-weather playing pitches when I've sat on planning committee. A school in Twickenham wanted to put one in, and for ecological reasons and I think for heritage reasons, we were able to block it. Doesn't mean they won't come back again. As we know, with plans, people keep trying, keep on trying. I think we've all said a lot about how, as candidates, if we were to be elected, that we would, once in. As the Assembly member, we would try and lobby Jules Pipe, Deputy Mayor, for planning, Tom Copley, Sadiq Khan. And again, this is another issue that we would have to try and do. Those are our levers, as it were. Just one thing to say that obviously we are all standing for the constituency Assembly member. There are other Assembly members who represent the whole of London. So you have London-wide Assembly members, which you can call on as well. So, for example, and that's how we have 2 Green Assembly members and 1 Lib Dem. At the moment, for those who may not know, London Assembly has 25 Assembly members, and about 20 of them are either Labour or Conservative. And the way we get other voices and a more diverse range of voices is by voting on the London-wide list. And they then are able to speak for you wherever you live in London. And as the bonus from that, what then happens is that they can see issues across the whole of London that are being repeated that you may not see as a constituency Assembly member. So, for example, Sean Berry has noticed that when an application is refused by council or is passed up because of the way the system works, and the mayor then passes it, there then becomes a lack of connection between who is actually responsible for that development. Because normally, if it's passed by a local council, if you have an issue with the development, you'd be able to go to your local council and say, there's an environmental issue, or there's this issue, they're not sticking with their construction plan. But when it's a planning development that's being passed by the mayor, there is that lack of connection. There is no one in the mayor's office to go to and say, this development is not meeting its standards. What are you going to do about it? So Sian Berry, being that London-wide Assembly member, has actually done a lot of work to try and bring to the mayor's attention issues like that are London-wide, and to highlight problems with the planning. So just to reiterate that there are different ways of calling for issues to be worked on. The green space Mortlake Brewery Community Group, their demands or their calls for better green space is one that is dear to my heart, and I agree with pretty much everything they say. I can see that Mortlake does have a big problem with lack of green space. As you say, they've only got the 2 small spaces, and obviously Richmond Park is a good 25-minute bare minimum walk up quite a steep hill and across the level crossing. And one of the proposals that we put forward as a green group in our response to the Royal Parks movement strategy would be to bring in minibuses, electric minibuses from stations going to and from the park, so that they can enable people to get there without having to take their car, which people will do. So there are different and imaginative ways of finding solutions to the problems of car transport.
Thank you, Andrée. I think that's a very interesting idea. And Candice, to you now, the question about this field, which has never actually ever been built on, so it's heartbreaking to imagine that turf being dug up. And then when you've spoken, Candice, I've got a final question, which is going to call for a one-word answer, and that then we'll close. So over to you on the greenfield, Candice. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the question about what would I do with the playing field, I can think of a number of things that I would want to do, but Gareth said, if not schools, what else? And I think actually, if we pass that question to the community, they will tell you exactly what is needed and what they really, really want. I mean, throughout the pandemic, we've learned at Hounslow Council that the community came up with so many solutions to support our shielded residents, support our people who are suffering with their mental health, to even support people who were in high rise who couldn't access green spaces, and we had budgets and money was provided to get people to have small plants that they could have in their home, do growing, etc. So I think what I would want to do is ask that question, and actually the community group already have lots of ideas, but it's really about trying to pass that power back and making sure that we can do some co-designing and really try and push the developers to listen to what the community wants. I mean, some of our schools in Hounslow do have some lovely green spaces, and I think it's actually a bit of a travesty that when it comes to the weekend, schools are closed and those spaces, can often be overlooked by children in higher buildings or all kinds of buildings, and they can't access them. So I would love to see any playing fields, fully accessible, whether they're on the grounds of a school or they belong, so people can enjoy and get to them. And just open space for me is is freedom, and it's where children can just grow and develop and have their own imagination, have lots of fun. But I think really I wouldn't want to say what should be done. I would want to be having community engagement and asking that question of the community.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, there's strong feelings about many aspects of this development, but the field, I think, more than anything, makes people really, really just full of sadness to imagine what's going to happen to it. So rare to see a piece of open land dealt with in that way. So it's lovely to hear what you've all said. Thank you very much on that. So we come to the end, and you're not going to be surprised by my final question, which is simply this: if you were elected, would you commit to urging the mayor to refusing the application that's in front of the mayor? I'm not going to predict who's going to win that. So can we just do the reverse order then? And Candice, yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Andrée?
A resounding yes.
That's two.
Absolutely.
Gareth? You're on mute.
Nearly an hour and 20 minutes in the first time. Indubitably.
Meaning?
Undoubtedly, definitely, yes, 100%, no questions asked, money back guarantee, sign it here.
Okay, thank you, Nick.
I'll just stick with a simple yes.
Okay, well, I'm sure that all of us listening wish that all 4 of you could get elected. And I know that sadly only one of you is going to be elected, but I think it's been a fantastic evening. And I just, on behalf of everybody listening, and we've just now at the moment dropped below 100, and that's people with their computers on. So I imagine there have been many, many more people listening in. It is recorded, it's going to go up on the website, others will watch it, but we want to say a huge thank you to you, not only for the time you're giving this evening, not only for the interest that you've taken in our very local issues, but also, you know, in these days, it's a very fine thing, if I can say this as a former civil servant, to stand for public office. It's not easy to go into politics, and we're very appreciative that you've all decided to put yourselves forward and to be part of this campaign. That said, the lucky winner amongst the invitations waiting for you will be a meeting in person, in public, here in Mortlake, hopefully in July, where we would like to invite the elected candidate to come and meet people and talk to us further about the ideas that you put out this evening, and to see how we can build a closer working relationship with you as we manage our way through these very difficult planning issues. So that's all from me, really. I just want to say a warm thank you and best of luck in the forthcoming election to you all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks very much indeed. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.